My name's David, I'm 27, and if you told me 2 months ago that I'd be sitting here writing about how my entire family got exposed by a single voice message, I would have laughed and said, that only happens in movies. But no, it happened to me, and it started on one of those nights where you're already a little tired, a little vulnerable, and then life decides to smack you across the face just to see how you'll react. To understand what happened, you need to know a bit about my family. I was the middle child in a house where being the dependable one wasn't really a compliment. My older brother, Kevin, was the golden boy, the one who always had a spotlight no matter how dim his actual accomplishments were. He could forget to pay his bills for months, crash his car twice, and somehow my parents would frame it as he just has so much potential, he's distracted. My younger sister, Mia, was the baby. Anything she did was precious, even if it was objectively ridiculous. When she decided to drop out of college after one semester, my mom called it her journey. Meanwhile, I was the one working 2 jobs in high school to help keep the lights on, the one who covered groceries when mom's paycheck was late, and the one who quietly made sure my siblings' birthdays were never short of a gift, even when nobody else remembered mine. You'd think that would earn me a little respect, right? But in my family, responsibility wasn't admired. It was expected, like I was the floor under their feet, meant to hold them up, but never noticed. And I played into it, because what else could I do? When you're told for years that you're good with money and reliable, you start picking up the slack without realizing how much of yourself you're giving away. The breaking point didn't come in some dramatic fight. It came quietly, like most betrayals do. I was in my room, about to go to sleep, when I saw a voice message pop up on my phone. It was from Kevin. Weird, he never sends me voice messages. I pressed play, half asleep, expecting maybe a casual reminder about borrowing money or asking if I could drive him somewhere. But what I heard, does he really think we care? We're just using him until he's broke. I froze. At first, I thought I misheard. I replayed it. The exact same words. His voice, dripping with that cocky, dismissive tone I knew too well. My chest tightened. I replayed it again. And again. My brain kept tripping over the words, using him, until he's broke. And then it hit me. The message wasn't meant for me. It was meant for our mom. I sat there staring at the ceiling, my phone clutched in my hand like it might bite me. All those nights covering bills, buying groceries, handing Kevin loans I knew I'd never see back. All of it suddenly rewrote itself in my memory. They weren't grateful. They weren't even indifferent. They were counting down the days until I had nothing left to give. My own brother thought I was too naive to notice. I didn't sleep that night. My thoughts bounced between fury and disbelief, back and forth until they burned. I kept remembering every small moment I'd shrugged off. The way Mom would sigh dramatically when I said I couldn't spot Kevin again this month. The way Mia once joked that I was basically the family's ATM. At the time, I laughed along to keep the peace. But now, hearing Kevin's words, those moments felt like puzzle pieces clicking into place. A picture I never wanted to see, but couldn't unsee now. I wish I could tell you I calmly confronted them the next morning. That I walked into the kitchen, put my phone on the table, hit play, and demanded answers. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I just shut down. I packed a bag before the sun came up. Tossed in the essentials, my laptop, a few shirts, my passport. Not because I had a plan, but because something in me knew I couldn't keep playing the role they'd written for me. When Mom called out from the living room as I walked past with my bag, "David, can you grab milk on your way back?" I almost laughed. Here I was, replaying my brother's words like a knife twisting deeper each time, and she still saw me as the errand boy. I mumbled something about going out and stepped outside. The morning air was sharp, cutting. I felt a strange calm under the hurt, like my body knew what my mind was still catching up to. I wasn't coming back. But here's the thing, leaving wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Because as much as I wanted to disappear, to never deal with them again, there was another part of me, a quieter, colder part, that whispered, make them see, make them feel it. That's when I knew this wasn't just a story of me walking away. It was going to be something else entirely. And it all started with that single voice message, proof of what they really thought of me. Proof I couldn't ignore. Proof I could use. I didn't just vanish into the sunrise without leaving some kind of breadcrumb trail. I stayed in the same city, just a few neighborhoods over, in a tiny sublet apartment that smelled faintly of paint and old carpet. I wanted space, not a full disappearance. But when I tell you the calls started within hours, I'm not exaggerating. My phone buzzed so much that morning I thought maybe something had happened, some emergency. A dozen missed calls from Mom, 5 from Kevin, a handful from Mia. At first, I thought, maybe they're worried. For a moment, I almost let myself believe that. But the moment I picked up one of Mom's calls, the illusion cracked. "David, where are you?" Her voice was sharp, not panicked. "You can't just run off when we need you. Kevin's car broke down again, and I told him you'd help cover the tow. You didn't answer your brother. That's irresponsible." I didn't say anything at first, just listened to the words sink in. "No. Are you okay? No, what's going on?" Just straight to logistics and money. I muttered, "I'm busy," and hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear but from the realization that everything I'd replayed in my head all night, it was real. They saw me as nothing more than the dependable wallet. The days that followed turned into an odd kind of performance. I stopped answering most of their calls, only picking up once every day or two. And every single time, without fail, it was some version of, "David, can you?" or "David, we need you to." Mia wanted me to help her with her rent because she'd spent her paycheck on a shopping trip. Kevin wanted me to cover his overdue insurance. Mom said she needed help paying off a small credit card bill that, when I asked, turned out to be nearly $4,000. When I hesitated, she'd guilt-trip me with lines like, "Don't you care about your family? We've done so much for you." That line stuck with me. "We've done so much for you." I kept replaying it in my head. What exactly had they done? Raised me? Sure. But love, real love, doesn't come with a tab. I thought about all the birthdays where my gifts were an afterthought, if they came at all. I thought about when I graduated high school and Kevin got a brand new laptop for future college work, while I got a handshake and a used duffel bag. I thought about when I came home exhausted after double shifts in college, and Mom would sigh and ask if I could drive Mia to her friend's party because she's too young to take the bus. All those little things I had buried started resurfacing like splinters working their way out of skin. And now, armed with Kevin's voice message, I couldn't ignore them anymore. The favoritism wasn't just in money, either. Kevin was constantly bailed out. When he lost his job, again, Mom blamed toxic bosses and said he just needed time to find himself. Meanwhile, when I mentioned maybe taking a week off after years of nonstop work, the response was immediate. "A week? Who's going to help with bills while you're on vacation?" Mia was treated like royalty. She once borrowed my car for a weekend and returned it with a dented bumper. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes and said, "It's not that bad." Mom backed her up, saying, "You're being dramatic, David. It's just a car." But when Kevin's car broke down, they staged a family meeting, called it a crisis, and insisted everyone chip in for repairs. Everyone meaning me, because apparently Mia was still young and Kevin was between jobs. The irony of it all was suffocating. It was around this time that the manipulation started ramping up. At first it was little guilt trips, but then Mom's tone shifted into something darker. One night, she left me a voicemail that said, "David, you can't punish us for depending on you. Family is family. If you stop helping, what does that say about you as a person?" The way she twisted it, like I was cruel for setting boundaries, left me stunned. I saved that voicemail, just like I saved Kevin's voice message. Evidence. Proof. There were smaller moments that chipped away at me too. Kevin showed up at my apartment unannounced one afternoon. I don't know how he found out where I was staying, but there he was, knocking like he owned the place. When I opened the door, he didn't even ask how I was. He just walked in, sat on the couch, and said, "Look, man, I'm in a tight spot. I know you've got savings. Just loan me a few thousand until I get back on my feet. You know I'll pay you back." I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You'll pay me back? When? You've owed me for years." He scoffed, leaned back, and said, "Come on, don't be petty. You're not going to let your own brother sink, are you?" That sentence, more than anything, crystallized how they saw me. Not as a brother, not as a son, not even as a person, just as a safety net. Something to fall on when their bad choices caught up with them. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time. My anger was sharp, but underneath it was something heavier, grief. I realized I wasn't mourning money. I was mourning the family I thought I had. I was mourning the hope that one day they'd appreciate me. That hope died quietly in that small, dim apartment. The tension grew worse when they started pulling other people into it. My aunt called me one morning, saying, "Your mom's worried sick." She says you've changed. She said you're abandoning them. My mom had painted me as the villain, the selfish son who turned his back on his family. And people believed her because that's how it always went. My brother was the golden boy, my sister was the baby, and I was the workhorse. So when I stopped carrying the weight, they framed it as betrayal. But here's the thing. While all this manipulation and mistreatment was building, something inside me was shifting too. For the first time, I wasn't bending. I wasn't rushing over to solve their problems. And every time I said no, it got a little easier. Every no felt like reclaiming a piece of myself they'd taken long ago. Still, I knew this wasn't sustainable. They weren't going to stop pushing. The guilt trips were turning into threats of disownment, whispered warnings about how you'll regret treating your family this way. And Kevin was getting desperate. I could hear it in his voice. The entitlement wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was fear. And that's when I realized something. The more desperate they became, the more reckless they'd get. And if I played it right, that desperation could be the very thing that exposed them, not just to me, but to everyone. When I think back to the moment everything finally snapped, it wasn't loud at first. It didn't come with a slammed door or a screaming match. It came creeping in, disguised as just another favor, the kind I used to do without thinking. Only this time, I wasn't the same person they had leaned on for years. I had already seen behind the curtain. I knew the truth. And when I refused, when I put my foot down for the first real time in my life, that's when the betrayal came. It started with Kevin, because of course it did. He called one Friday night, his voice thick with fake cheer. "Hey bro, you busy?" I already knew what was coming. I told him I was tied up, working late on a project. He brushed it off like I hadn't spoken. Cool. Listen, I need a big favor. I'm putting a down payment on a condo, just a starter place, nothing crazy, and the bank needs to see that I've got a co-signer with a stable record. You've got that, man. You've always been reliable. Just put your name on it, and I'll handle the rest. Easy. The audacity almost made me laugh. He hadn't paid back a single cent of what he owed me. He'd crashed through job after job, and yet here he was, casually asking me to tie my financial future to his chaos. "No, Kevin," I said flatly. "I'm not doing that." There was a pause, then a scoff. "Wow, seriously? After everything I've done for you?" That line was like nails on a chalkboard. I snapped. "Everything you've done for me? You've done nothing but take. You left me to pick up the pieces every single time you messed up. I'm done. I'm not co-signing. I'm not bailing you out. I'm not your safety net anymore." He didn't argue back. He just went quiet and hung up. And for a brief, shining moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd finally gotten it. Maybe he'd finally understand he couldn't treat me like that anymore. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was just junk until I saw the letterhead from a bank. It was addressed to me and congratulated me on being approved as a co-signer for a mortgage. My stomach dropped. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. But when I flipped through the papers, there it was. My name, my signature, except it wasn't mine. Kevin had forged it. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, the pages trembling in my hands, my mouth dry. My own brother had faked my signature to trap me into his mess. It wasn't just thoughtless or careless. It was deliberate, cold, a knife in the back, driven in with a smile. I called him immediately, my voice shaking with fury. He answered on the third ring, too casual, like nothing was wrong. "Yo, what's up?" "Don't yo me." I spat. "You forged my name. Do you understand what you've done? That's fraud, Kevin. That's illegal." He sighed, annoyed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Calm down. It's just paperwork. Nobody's gonna care. You've got good credit, I don't. This way the bank gets off my back. What's the big deal?" "The big deal," I nearly shouted, "is that you put me on the hook for a mortgage I didn't agree to. If you mess this up, and you will, they'll come after me. Do you even get that?" His tone shifted then, from dismissive to something sharper, more venomous. "Stop acting like you're some victim. You've got savings, a good job, your own place. You'll be fine. We're family. Family helps family. Or are you too selfish to get that?" Selfish. That word hit me harder than I expected. After years of emptying my pockets, covering their bills, buying groceries, paying application fees for my siblings' schools, selfish was the word he chose. The betrayal burned hotter than any insult could. I didn't even respond. I hung up, my whole body shaking. I sat there for hours, staring at those papers, feeling like the walls of my apartment were closing in. The air was heavy, suffocating. I wasn't just angry, I was heartbroken. It was one thing to be underappreciated. It was another thing entirely to be used so blatantly, to have my own brother break the law and drag my name into it without a shred of hesitation. And then came the second blow. Mom called me that evening, her voice syrupy sweet in a way that immediately put me on edge. David, honey, Kevin told me you're upset. You can't take this so personally. You just needed a little help getting started. You know how hard the world is right now. Besides, what are brothers for? I couldn't believe it. She knew. She knew, and she was defending him. Do you understand what he did? I asked, my voice hoarse. He forged my signature. That's not a little help. That's fraud. That could ruin me. There was a pause, then her sigh. The same sigh she always used when she thought I was being dramatic. David, don't overreact. You've always had a flair for turning small things into big problems. Kevin is your brother. He wouldn't hurt you. If you really love this family, you'd let this go. My chest ached at those words. Let this go? As if this betrayal was just another inconvenience I was supposed to swallow. As if my love for them was supposed to mean letting them burn me alive. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk, the papers spread out in front of me, staring at my forged signature. Every line of ink felt like a slap across my face. And in the silence of my apartment, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just mistreatment anymore. This was war. The emotional turning point wasn't just the act itself. It was realizing how little my family thought of me. Not just Kevin, but Mom too. The two people I had spent my life trying to please had shown me, crystal clear, that they saw me as nothing but a resource. A wallet with a pulse. A name to sign on dotted lines when they couldn't qualify. The next day, I got a call from Mia. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Hey, big brother, she chirped, too cheerful. So, Mom said you're being a little stubborn about the condo thing. I just wanted to say, don't be difficult. Kevin deserves a nice place, you know? He's had a hard time. We all agreed it was the right thing. You're the only one making this messy. We all agreed. Those words sliced through me. They had discussed it. Behind my back. My whole family had agreed to sacrifice me without even asking. I hung up without saying a word. My hands were trembling again, but not from shock this time. From clarity. From resolve. That was the major betrayal. Not just Kevin's forgery. Not just Mom's defense. Not just Mia's condescension. It was the realization that I was outnumbered. That my family, the people I thought I was sacrificing for, had looked at me and decided I was expendable. And as I sat there, staring out the window at the city lights, one thought repeated in my mind, over and over, until it carved itself into my bones. If they could betray me this easily, I could no longer afford to play nice. I hit rock bottom in a way I didn't even recognize at first. It wasn't some cinematic collapse where you throw things and scream until your throat gives out. It was quieter than that, like a house where the lights go out one by one until you're sitting in the dark. After Mia's call, I stopped answering the phone entirely. Every time it buzzed, my stomach turned. I couldn't bring myself to look at the screen because I already knew what would be waiting there. More demands, more guilt trips, more little reminders that I was the villain in the story they'd all written about me. In their version, Kevin was the dreamer, Mia was the baby, Mom was the martyr holding everyone together, and I was the selfish son who abandoned them. My days fell into a strange rhythm. I'd wake up, make coffee, and sit in silence while my phone vibrated off the edge of the counter. At work, I was distracted, running on autopilot. I made mistakes I'd never made before, missed deadlines, forgot simple details. People noticed, but they didn't push. I've always been this steady one, the reliable one, and reliable people don't just fall apart overnight. But inside, I felt like I was unraveling. Every memory of my family, the good ones and the bad, started bleeding together until I couldn't tell which was which. I thought about the time I saved for 6 months to buy Kevin a new laptop after he spilled beer on his old one, and how he used it to gamble online. I thought about when Mia borrowed my credit card for textbooks but spent it on designer sneakers. I thought about the Christmas morning I worked a double shift so they could have a proper dinner, only to come home to cold leftovers and a family movie I wasn't invited to watch. Those moments hit me like waves, one after another, until I was drowning in them. I stopped going out. I stopped answering friends' texts. Even grocery shopping became a chore. I'd walk to the store with my hood up, avoiding eye contact, grab whatever was closest, and leave. My world shrank to my tiny apartment, my desk at work, and the thoughts that wouldn't leave me alone. And still, the demands kept coming. One morning, I woke up to find an envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note from my mom. "David, you're scaring us. This isn't you. We need you to come home. Kevin is struggling and the mortgage payment is due soon. Please, don't let your brother lose everything." Lose everything. As if I hadn't lost enough already. I sat on the edge of my bed, the note trembling in my hands. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. For the first time in my life, I thought about leaving the city entirely, just packing a bag, getting in my car, and driving until the gas ran out. No phone, no forwarding address. Just gone. But every time I imagined it, something stopped me. A voice in the back of my head whispered, "If you disappear, they'll spin the story. They'll make you the villain forever. They'll never be held accountable." That voice scared me a little because it didn't sound like despair. It sounded like strategy. Around this time, my health started to slip. I was barely eating, surviving on coffee and whatever I could throw together without effort. My sleep schedule was wrecked, 2 hours here, 3 hours there. I started losing weight, my clothes hanging looser. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. His eyes were darker, his jaw tighter. He looked like someone who'd been through a war nobody else could see. I reached my lowest point the night I got a voicemail from my aunt, the same one who'd called me weeks before to scold me for abandoning my family. Her voice was different this time. Cold. "David, I don't know what's gotten into you, but your mother is beside herself. You're letting your brother drown. If you don't step up soon, don't expect this family to welcome you back." Welcome me back. As if I had left them, instead of them pushing me out. I hung up and sat there in the dark for a long time. No TV, no music, just the hum of the fridge and the glow of the city through my window. My hands were trembling, but not from fear this time. From clarity. Because here's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, the noise stops. The panic fades. All that's left is the truth, and the truth was this. I was never going to get the family I wanted. They were never going to wake up one morning and realize how wrong they'd been. They weren't going to apologize. They weren't going to change. That realization hurt more than anything Kevin or Mom had done. It felt like a death. But in that death, there was also freedom. If they were never going to change, then I didn't have to keep waiting. I didn't have to keep hoping. That night, I pulled out a notebook I hadn't touched in years. The cover was worn, the pages yellowing a little. I opened to the first blank page and started writing. Not a journal entry, not a rant, a plan. I wrote down every loan I'd ever given Kevin, every bill I'd paid for Mom, every time Mia had borrowed money or favors without paying me back. I made columns, dates, amounts, notes. My pen moved faster than I thought it would, memory after memory pouring out. It wasn't just numbers, it was evidence. A record of years of quiet sacrifices they'd taken for granted. Then I pulled up Kevin's voice message on my phone. I listened to it again, even though it hurt, and transcribed it word for word. Then I did the same with Mom's guilt-tripping voicemail. Line after line, I built a paper trail. Proof of how they saw me. Proof of what they'd done. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt focus. I wasn't sure yet what I was going to do with all of it. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let them bury me under their mess anymore. If they wanted a villain in their story, I'd give them one. Only not the kind they expected. I still went to work every day. I still paid my own bills. On the surface, nothing had changed. But inside, everything was different. I stopped answering their calls altogether. I stopped opening their letters. I let the guilt trips pile up in my voicemail like snowdrifts. And every night, I sat at my desk under the dim glow of a cheap lamp, adding more to my notebook. More details, more connections, more leverage. They thought I was breaking down. In a way, I was. But what they didn't see was that while I was breaking down, I was also building something. Rock bottom wasn't the end. It was the basement of a house I was about to rebuild on my own terms. And somewhere, in the back of my mind, a new thought started forming. Quiet, patient, dangerous. What if I could make them see? What if I could make them feel it? When you've been at the bottom long enough, the first step upward feels almost unreal. At first, I didn't even recognize it as progress. I thought maybe I was just distracting myself. numbing the pain by throwing myself into work and small routines. But slowly, piece by piece, I started to realize I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was changing. It began with small victories. At work, I forced myself to focus again. Those missed deadlines and half-finished projects had been hanging over me, making me feel like I was slipping in every direction. So I made a rule: no family calls, no distractions. My phone stayed face down on my desk, on silent. And with that simple boundary, I noticed something incredible. I got things done. My boss noticed too. After a few weeks of consistent effort, he pulled me aside and said, "David, whatever you've been doing, keep it up. The quality of your work lately has been excellent." It felt good. More than good, it felt validating. For so long, my worth had been measured by how much I could sacrifice for other people. To have someone notice my effort for what it was, without strings attached, it lit something inside me I didn't realize I'd been missing. From there, momentum started to build. I took on a bigger project at work, something I might have hesitated to do before because I was always bracing for the next family crisis to derail me. But this time, I leaned in. I stayed late, not because I was covering someone else's mess, but because I wanted to. And when the project launched successfully, my name was right there in the credit list. For once, the recognition was mine. With work stabilizing, I started looking at my finances. For years, my bank account had been a revolving door. Money came in, money went out, usually to cover someone else's emergency. Now that I wasn't bleeding cash into Kevin's endless debts or Mia's just this once requests, I realized I actually had breathing room. I paid off my remaining credit card balance within 2 months. I started putting money into savings. Watching that number grow, little by little, was like watching a shield form around me. Each deposit wasn't just money, it was security. It was proof I could stand on my own. The biggest shift, though, wasn't external. It was internal. I started running again. Back in college, I used to run in the mornings to clear my head, but I'd stopped when life got too heavy. One morning, after another night of sitting at my desk scribbling in my notebook, I laced up my old sneakers and just went. The air was cold, my lungs burned, and I felt out of shape, but when I came back, drenched in sweat, I felt alive. The next day, I went again. And again. Running became my ritual, my way of reminding myself that forward motion was possible, even when it hurt. And slowly, as my body grew stronger, so did my mind. The fog I'd been living under started to lift. I slept better. I ate better. I looked in the mirror, and, for the first time in years, I didn't just see the tired, hollow man who carried everyone else's burdens. I saw someone sharper, someone rebuilding. Meanwhile, my family kept trying to reel me back in. The calls didn't stop, but I didn't answer. They left messages that shifted in tone like a pendulum. One day guilt, the next anger, the next false sweetness. Kevin even texted me a photo of the condo, saying, "You'd love it here, man. We could split it." I didn't respond. Each silence was a declaration. I was no longer theirs to use. What they didn't know was that while I was ignoring them, I was also preparing. My notebook had grown thick with entries by now. I had every debt logged, every voicemail transcribed, every forgery noted. It wasn't just therapy anymore, it was a dossier. And with each passing week, the idea of using it stopped being a fantasy and started feeling like inevitability. But before any revenge, I needed to rise. I needed to get to a place where I wasn't just surviving them, but thriving in spite of them. That opportunity came sooner than I expected. My boss approached me with a new role, a promotion. More responsibility, yes, but also a significant raise. When he offered it, he said, "You've shown leadership potential. You don't just fix problems, you anticipate them." That's rare. I nearly laughed out loud. Fixing problems was second nature to me. I'd been doing it for my family my whole life. But this time, it was working for me, not against me. With the promotion came more income, and I didn't waste it. I upgraded my apartment to a slightly bigger one, with sunlight streaming through the windows and a kitchen that actually made me want to cook. I bought furniture that was mine, not hand-me-downs. For the first time, my space felt like it belonged to me, not borrowed, not temporary, not something I had to apologize for. Friends I'd neglected started noticing the change too. One evening, an old college buddy invited me out for dinner. I almost said no out of habit, but I went. Sitting at that table, laughing and talking about things that had nothing to do with family drama, I realized how much of life I'd missed by being tethered to their chaos. I started saying yes more often, to dinners, to hikes, to simple conversations. Slowly, my world expanded beyond the four walls of obligation I'd been trapped in. And all the while, my family's messages grew more desperate. Kevin left me a string of voicemails, his voice less confident each time. "Come on, bro, don't do this to me." Then, "You're ruining everything." Then finally, "If you don't help me, I swear I'll make sure you regret it." That last one didn't scare me. It only confirmed what I already knew. The power dynamic was shifting. They could sense it, even if they didn't understand it. For the first time in my life, I had something they couldn't touch: independence. And the more I grew, the weaker their grip became. By the time my savings account hit a number I never thought I'd see, by the time my new apartment was filled with light instead of shadows, by the time my friends started telling me I seemed like a different person, I realized something important. I wasn't just rising out of rock bottom. I was climbing toward something higher, something they couldn't reach. And in that height, in that clarity, the idea of revenge stopped being an abstract dream. It became a plan, because while I was growing stronger, they were growing weaker. And one day soon, I was going to make sure the entire family saw the truth I'd been carrying in silence for years. I learned quickly that revenge isn't a burst of righteous fury. It's research, logistics, timing, and patience. After the promotion and the savings and the runs that cleared my head, I started treating this like a job I had to plan for carefully, because if I wanted them to feel the fallout, I couldn't afford sloppy theatrics. I needed facts, chain of evidence, and a plan that wouldn't crumble the moment someone threw emotional chaos at it. The first thing I did was protect myself. That was practical, not vindictive. I called my bank, closed a few older accounts that had outdated security, and opened a new checking and savings under slightly different settings, stronger passwords, two-factor authentication, and alerts on anything suspicious. I put fraud alerts on my credit reports. I also had a frank conversation with my new HR contact at work about the forged mortgage paperwork. Nothing more than, "If something shows up in my credit, I need an employment verification fast." It was benign to them, but candid for me. I wanted a paper trail showing I was proactive, because the last thing I needed was someone gaslighting me about being paranoid when the banks called. Then I spent money the way people in my family never would have approved of: hiring experts. Not flashy private detectives with trench coats and hidden cameras, just a quiet, reputable PI who specialized in document verification and background checks. I spent a week interviewing two professionals and chose the one who didn't promise drama, just factual answers. The first thing she did was what I should have done myself: compare handwriting, confirm the origin of the mortgage application, and track the IP addresses used when the bank accepted Kevin's forms. Within 10 days, she produced a short dossier that felt like ice water in my veins and fuel for my resolve. Her report confirmed what my gut had already told me. The signature on the mortgage application matched samples of Kevin's handwriting, not mine. The application was submitted from a device that pinged near our parents' house the day before the bank mailed the acceptance letter. There were copies of emails where Kevin had asked someone at a local notary to make it look legit. That last email was the real dagger, sent from Kevin's account to a third party, requesting steps to help our situation. It didn't prove the whole story by itself, but it was enough to start building a case. With that dossier in my hands, I spoke to a lawyer. I wasn't looking for theatrics. I wanted options. The lawyer I found specialized in consumer fraud and small claims, and she listened without blinking at the details: forged signature, coerced cosigner, bank involvement, and family lies. She recommended filing a criminal complaint for forgery and identity fraud, and simultaneously sending a cease and desist to Kevin and anyone trying to collect on that mortgage from me. She explained the process in plain, useful terms: evidence, official filings, protective steps to freeze liability, and a plan to bring the bank into the fold as a partner in the investigation, not an adversary. Her tone was businesslike, which I liked. Revenge disguised as legality, clean, annoying, and final. We filed the police report. That felt strange, sitting in a fluorescent-lit office and telling a stranger about the person who raised you and the brother who'd signed your name without your consent. The officer took notes, asked for copies of the mortgage paperwork, and asked me to provide the transcribed voicemails and the PI report. I left feeling strangely exposed and a little relieved, like I'd moved from simmer to simmer plus. Something was actually happening. While the criminal route worked its way through the system, I switched into architect mode. If I wanted to expose them in a way that would land, something public enough to hurt their ego and private enough to protect me legally, I needed more than legal filings. I needed credibility. That meant archives, backups, organized documentation, and timing. I created a meticulous binder. Not just paper copies, but scanned files, time-stamped audio files, a secure cloud folder with read-only links, and a mirrored physical folder locked away. Every loan I'd given Kevin had a receipt, a Venmo transfer screenshot, or a bank note on it. Every time Mom had guilted me, I'd saved a snippet, not for theater, but because I wanted a timeline. I labeled everything with dates and small notes, so anyone flipping through it would instantly see the pattern. Ask, pay, forget, repeat. The binder wasn't just for me. It was, as the lawyer had said, an evidentiary map. Meanwhile, I started quietly informing a few people who needed to know. Not everyone. I didn't want attempt number 50 of everyone in the family to flood my life. I told one friend from work, someone with legal training, and an aunt who'd once shown she could weigh evidence without emotion. Their reactions were measured, not celebratory, and that steadied me. I needed allies who wouldn't be swayed by sob stories or performative apologies. I also began to leverage my social capital in small, precise ways. I updated my LinkedIn and professional profiles not out of vanity, but because I wanted a public record of stability and character. Part of my plan was reputational. If they tried to smear me as the bad son, a strong, professional, documented life would counter that narrative. I took steps to separate my public life from the family drama. I posted about an industry talk I attended, about a small win at work, about a charity 5K I signed up for. Little things. Not to brag, but to show quiet competence. I wasn't trying to humiliate anyone yet. I was building a platform that would make people listen when I spoke. There were also practical shields. I transferred some assets into accounts with higher protection, consolidated passwords, and set up an LLC for a small side project I'd been tinkering with for months. The LLC was mostly a technicality, a way to separate funds and create a legal entity that couldn't be easily reached by the messy tentacles of family claims. I was careful to have the lawyer structure everything cleanly and document it. I wasn't trying to hide money from anyone. I was protecting myself from being dragged into their financial mess again. As I built the infrastructure, I rehearsed narratives. Not to gaslight them. To be able to speak calmly, dispassionately, and factually if it ever came to a confrontation. I practiced with my friend who had legal training, saying the facts without drama. Kevin forged my signature. Bank records show submission from his neighborhood. PI report confirms handwriting match. I filed a police report. Saying it over and over made it sharper, less like an accusation and more like a statement of events. I also began testing their boundaries in small ways. I started returning 1 or 2 calls with a neutral. I'm aware of the mortgage paperwork. I'm handling it through the proper channels. Their reactions were immediate and telling. Mom tried the hurt and confusion act, her voice wobbling as if the world was collapsing around her. Kevin oscillated between pleading and bravado, trying to guilt me and then pretending my absence was no big deal. Mia sent me a text that read, "We miss you, come home," and then followed it with a photo of the condo with an emoji as if to say, "See? Big move." Their attempts to pull me back and became more performative the more distant I remained. The PI's findings opened other doors. There were inconsistencies in Kevin's financial claims that suggested he'd been leveraging other people before me. Old rental agreements with someone else's name forged on them. Small loans where the signatures looked copied. A pattern of taking advantage of people who trusted him. That sobered me. This wasn't a one-off act of desperation. This was a pattern. The thought of how long this had been going on, how many lives it might have affected, made me angrier than I'd expected and also steadied my resolve to see it through. Soon, the bank contacted me. They said they were reviewing an internal matter and asked if I could come in to speak with their investigations unit. I went. The bank rep was professional. His face was a map of corporate neutrality. He confirmed they'd flagged a suspicious account submission and that my police report had helped prioritize their review. He couldn't promise anything, but he did say, "We take this seriously. If the forged documents are confirmed, We can reverse the approval and pursue recovery. That phrase, reverse the approval, was the sound of a hammer in my chest. It meant Kevin could lose the condo deal. It meant his bragging pictures might go away. I also set a trap of sorts, ethically and carefully. I kept communicating, but only in ways that would generate records. If Kevin texted begging for cash, I replied by text asking for receipts and timelines. If Mom called, I followed up with a short email summarizing the call. Record, document, timestamp. The lawyer had been clear. Vague emotional appeals don't hold up in court. Facts do. The more I made them rely on text and email, the clearer the pattern became. All of this work, the PI, the lawyer, the bank conversations, the LLC, the financial moves, required money and energy. I spent both, but I stopped feeling like I was throwing resources into a black hole. Each expense was an investment in safety and leverage. Where once their voices could drown me, now I had standing and structure. I had, for the first time in my life, true options. And then came the moment that made the plan taste real. A cousin's wedding invitation arrived in the mail. It was for next month, scheduled at the same family hall where we'd had birthdays and holidays, the place full of our history. The invitation had that tone that families use to hint at unity. Big smiles, big toasts, maybe even a group photo. In the corner, someone had scrawled an extra note. Family will be celebrating Kevin's new place. Hope you can make it. The casualness of it stung. They were already preparing the applause. I folded the invitation and put it on my desk with the binder on top of it. The binder felt heavier than it had before. That night, as I lay in bed, the city hum outside, I mapped out how the wedding scene could unfold. I imagined Kevin bragging about the condo at the reception. I imagined Mom rising in the middle of the crowd to give a teary toast about family and sacrifice. I imagined guests clapping while I sat with the binder under the table, files that could prick the whole balloon. Everything in me wanted to storm in and scatter the proof in a dramatic flourish. Part of the old me pictured vindication as a single, glorious moment. A microphone snatched, a speech interrupted, the truth screamed across the room. But I learned not to confuse drama with effectiveness. If I wanted lasting impact, I couldn't rely on a single moment of catharsis. The lawyer had reminded me multiple times. You want this to stick. You want consequences that are recorded and irreversible. So I kept my plan quiet. I let the binder wait. I let the bank continue its internal review. I let the police handle their side. I waited for the right combination of official confirmation and public moment so that when I revealed the truth, it would be backed by documents, legal weight, and witnesses who could corroborate the facts. And then, 3 days before the wedding, everything changed in a way I hadn't expected. I got a text from my aunt, the one who'd always been practical, the one who could, if she chose, tip the family scales. Her message was short. We need to talk. Please come over tonight. It's about Kevin. My heart did that ridiculous, double beat thing it does in those movies right before the climax. A conversation with Aunt could be dangerous if she'd taken their side, or it could be an opportunity if she'd seen something. I looked at the invitation on my desk, then at the binder, then at the laptop where bank emails sat unread. For a moment, I almost closed everything down, deleted files out of fear. Then I remembered the notebook, the PI's report, the lawyer's steady voice telling me not to panic, and I grabbed my coat. I didn't know if I was walking into a setup or a surrender. I only knew that the next move, the one I was about to make by going to that house, could tip everything. I shut the door behind me, the winter air hitting my face like a promise, and walked toward whatever came next. The walk to Aunt Lila's house felt like walking into a courtroom. I wasn't sure whether I was the defendant or the plaintiff, whether she'd open the door with a casserole and warm eyes or with arms crossed and a lecture about family loyalty. When she opened the door, she looked smaller than I remembered, the bright laugh lines at the corners of her mouth softened by worry. She hugged me, quick and careful, like she was testing whether I'd break if she held on too long. Then she stepped back and invited me in without the usual small talk. That in itself was a sign. Aunt Lila wasn't one for drama. She was one for quiet decisions. We sat in her kitchen at that old table where I'd eaten too many undercooked pancakes as a kid. She poured tea and then waited until the kettle had cooled enough for me to take a sip. We need to be careful, she said finally, looking me in the eye. I don't want to be the reason this explodes, but things have been off. She told me about a neighbor who had overheard Kevin bragging about how he'd pulled a fast one, and how he'd asked the neighbor to hold off on something until after closing. She told me she'd seen receipts and bank notifications that didn't match the story the family was telling. She said it in a voice that had the steadiness of someone who'd weighed evidence quietly for days. There was no drama in it, just a tired clarity. When she asked if I had proof, I put the binder on the table between us. It felt heavier than I expected, like gravity had been concentrated into paper and ink. I walked her through the timeline. The loans, the payments that never came back, the voice messages transcribed and dated, the PI report with handwriting analysis, the bank's tentative communication, the police report number. She ran her finger along the edge of the pages as if reading a history of myself she hadn't wanted to see. "I'm so sorry, David," she said, and then she did something that surprised me. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did right by documenting it." We talked for hours, drafting the steps that would make the exposure unavoidable and unassailable. Aunt Lila had contacts, people who had watched our family for years but who weren't interested in gossip. She agreed to quietly tell 2 cousins who were close to the family's social circle and, more importantly, who were known for their level heads. She agreed to be a witness to the pattern. She told me she'd even spoken to a priest from our old church who had carried a reputation for fairness, not to bring religion into it, but to have someone trusted by the community aware of the facts should gossip start. Everything we did was measured to avoid a he said she said circus. We were building a factual net. While Aunt Lila lined up sympathetic, sober witnesses, I let the legal process run its course in the background. The bank called back with an update. They were temporarily reversing any approvals tied to the application and wanted to speak to Kevin. The police called to confirm they'd scheduled an interview for him next week, pending further review. I didn't celebrate. That's not my style. I marked dates in my calendar, double-checked the copies in the binder, and made sure everything was accessible in the cloud in case I needed to share it quickly and securely. But I also knew something important. Legal steps and quietly telling the right relatives would probably not be enough to make them feel the consequences. Some people change because the law tells them to. Others change only when the mirror is held up in public and they see their reflection clearly. My family, as we'd learned, loved the theater of public praise, Kevin more than anyone. If I wanted to hit him where it hurt, the stage that mattered was not the courtroom, but the one where applause and respect were handed out freely, a family event. So when the wedding invitation kept staring at me from my desk, I stopped thinking of it as a social obligation and started seeing it as a tool. The wedding was a place where Kevin would bask. The wedding was a place where Mom would give the speech about sacrifice. The wedding was a room full of people who trusted my family's narrative because they'd been fed it for years. Expose the truth there, right after the speech, and the shockwave would travel to places a police report alone couldn't reach. People who'd never listened to evidence might listen to a well-documented public reveal. I planned it with the same meticulousness I'd used for everything else. Aunt Lila agreed to sit with me at the reception table. 2 cousins would be discreetly instructed to ask for a quick word with the DJ, not to interrupt the program, but to create a moment when I could be at the microphone without being disruptive. I practiced what I would say until the words were clear and unemotional. No shrieking accusations, no theatrical flourishes. Just facts, read calmly and deliberately, backed by documentation and corroboration. That was the point, to make the truth feel inevitable, not vindictive. On the morning of the wedding, the house hummed with familiar chaos. Plates being wrapped, an aunt fretting over a dress, my phone buzzing with messages I ignored. I felt oddly detached as I dressed, a buttoned shirt, not a suit, jeans replaced by slacks I hadn't worn in months. I kept a small satchel with the essentials, my phone, the binder's most critical pages in a slim folder, a list of contacts for the bank investigator and the police, and a note with the sequence of events I intended to read. I said nothing to Mom. Kevin texted a string of celebratory emojis with a photo of the condo again. I didn't respond. Silence had become its own language. At the venue, the hall smelled like candles and lemon-scented cleaner. People hugged, clinked glasses, and smiled in ways that made my skin feel prickly because those smiles were built on assumptions that I knew were false. The family table sat near the front. Mom looked radiant, the kind of eyes glossed with pride look she wore when someone else in the family got applause. Kevin moved through the room like he owned it, handing out forced congratulations, and leaning into people's compliments. My heart thudded hard in my chest when I saw him laugh, not from fear so much as a cold, focused anger. He had built an image on my name. The ceremony passed. The toast segment began with the usual mini eulogies about family values. As expected, Mom stood eventually. She cleared her throat, smiled, and started into that familiar cadence. "We're so proud of Kevin. He's always been a dreamer. When he told us about the condo, I knew he was ready. Families step up for each other." She went on about sacrifice and support. Applause followed, warm and loud. The kind that confirms a story everyone wants to be true. That's when the plan moved like a well-oiled machine. Aunt Lila gave the signal, a gentle tug on my sleeve. Two cousins intercepted the DJ with a whispered word and a nod. The DJ, a sensible man who'd worked long enough to know when to be flexible, cued a gentle transition. The microphone was handed not to me immediately, but to a cousin who offered a casual remark. "Before we continue, can we have a moment to acknowledge something important?" People murmured. Kevin smiled, unaware. Mom's smile widened, mistaking the interruption for another round of praise. That was the dangerous confidence I needed him to have. My cousin glanced at me and nodded. I stood and walked to the microphone with the small folder under my arm. The movement felt surreal, like walking underwater. I had rehearsed staying calm. I had rehearsed every sentence. My throat was dry, but my hands were steady. I tapped the mic, which squealed softly, and said, "I don't want to derail the evening. I'll be brief." The room quieted in that peculiar way it does when someone grabs a line of attention. People leaned forward, curiosity, anticipation, the social equivalent of a held breath. I started with facts. A few months ago, I received a voice message that wasn't meant for me. It was a message from my brother, recorded to our mother, in which he said, "He thinks we care? We're just using him until he's broke." I saved that message. I also had my signature forged on mortgage paperwork that involved my name. I filed a police report. I hired a professional to verify handwriting. The bank has placed a hold on the loan while they investigate. I have copies of the documents here. I felt the room tilt. Some people went pale. Others shifted their weight, uncomfortable. Kevin's laugh died on his lips. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse with emotion. I read the PI's summarized findings, the date the application was submitted, the detail that it originated from an IP address near our parents' house. I said, "I'm not asking anyone to choose sides. I'm asking people to look at the facts." Aunt Lila quietly stood, and, like a slow wave, two cousins moved to the edges of the table to corroborate what I'd said. They'd been told different versions of events. They had seen social media bragging that contradicted those versions. The DJ kept the music low, but ready to cut if needed. Then, and here's where timing matters, I did something I'd debated for weeks. I held up my phone and played Kevin's voice message. His words filled the hall. "Does he really think we care? We're just using him until he's broke." For a beat, the world narrowed to that sentence, repeated in the hush. I watched faces in the crowd, some twisted with confusion, some with dawning horror. Mom's hands flew to her mouth. Kevin's face went ashen, the color draining from him in real time. But I stopped there. I didn't unfold every page of the binder across the table. I didn't throw accusations and walk out triumphant. That wasn't the point. The point was to make the truth undeniable and to set off a chain of events that would continue after the room emptied. I spoke calmly about the bank's review and the scheduled police interview. I told people I had filed a formal complaint and that I'd given copies of all documents to the investigator. I asked not for revenge, but for accountability. That's when I heard it. The sound of people processing something they believed without questioning. A cousin whispered, "No way." Another said, "He wouldn't," and then stopped. Among the clinking of glasses and the soft shuffle of chairs, there was a sudden clarity like wind through leaves. Mom was crying softly, not theatrical sobs, but real, raw sound that cut me unexpectedly. I felt something. Not pleasure, not triumph. An odd, quiet satisfaction that the truth was unspooling, not the giddy glee I had imagined in those darker hours. Kevin rose then, the way someone does when they're planning to argue. His voice was edged with the rehearsed outrage I'd heard before. "David, you can't do this here," he said. "You're tearing our family apart." He stepped forward, eyes wild, expecting to rally the room. Instead, he was met with faces that were no longer reflexively on his side. Some guests avoided eye contact. Others looked at him as if seeing him anew. At that precise, fraught moment, a text buzzed in my hand. I didn't look at it at first. I kept my voice steady and said, "I'd rather not argue tonight. The police have an appointment scheduled with Kevin next week to go over the paperwork. The bank has put the application on hold pending their internal investigation. I'm giving you all this because you deserve to know the truth." I folded my hands to hold the folder like evidence instead of a weapon. Then the text buzzed again, harder this time. Aunt Lila's face tightened as she read something on her own phone, her lips pressing together. For a second, she looked like someone seeing an outcome she hadn't expected. Kevin's jaw clenched, and he took a step toward me that was part threat and part plea. I glanced quickly down at my phone. The message was from the bank investigator. "We've just confirmed a hold and have scheduled a formal interview for Kevin tomorrow. Also, we located an additional irregular submission linked to him in our archives. Please stand by. We may need you to provide a deposition." The room felt suddenly electric. Conversations fractured into 1,000 threads. People stared. Kevin's face had lost all bravado. For the first time that night, he looked small in the way liars do when the fabric of the story collapses. I opened my mouth to say something, to explain more, to tell them about the other irregularities the PI had found, to point out the pattern that went beyond my case, when the DJ's assistant, who'd been hovering politely backstage, stepped forward and whispered into the DJ's ear. The DJ frowned, then looked at the groom, then at the crowd. A murmur rolled through the room like distant thunder. I hesitated. The moment I'd waited for had arrived, but it wasn't neat or pretty. It was messy, human, unpredictable. Kevin's voice had risen to the point of breaking. Mom was still crying. People were talking in small clusters, eyes wide. Phones raised to record small snippets of the unfolding scene. I felt the surge of adrenaline again, but it was tempered by something else. The legal gears turning in the background, the bank's email in my pocket, the police interview scheduled for tomorrow. I had done what I needed to do to make this stick. And then, just as Kevin opened his mouth to say something that might either denounce me or beg for mercy, the DJ's assistant returned with a look of concern. The assistant leaned toward the DJ and mouthed something I couldn't hear over the low hum of voices. The DJ's expression changed from bewildered to alarmed, and he reached for the microphone. I felt the room tilt toward a single point: the microphone, the binders, the smudged ink of years of lies. I looked at Kevin, whose face was a mixture of anger and panic, then at Mom, whose tears had stopped and who now stared at me like someone who'd been woken from a long sleep. I opened my mouth to say the one thing I'd rehearsed a dozen ways, the line that would make this more than a scene and turn it into an action with consequences. When the DJ finally cleared the microphone and the room settled into an awkward hush, the evening that had felt so certain a few hours earlier fractured into 1,000 small, sharp moments. People whispered, phones hovered like little silver recorders, and Kevin stood with that peculiar mix of fury and pleading that only someone realizing the rug had been pulled from under them can wear. I watched him for a long beat, the brother I'd shared a childhood with, and felt no hatred, only a slow, cool resolve. What I had wanted all along wasn't to humiliate him in front of everyone. It was to make sure the truth had weight, that it would carry beyond the clinking glasses and the story they'd told for years. That night it did. The immediate fallout was messy and public in equal measure. Word spread through the relatives like wildfire. By the following morning, the groom's family group chat, the one people treated like an official bulletin board for reunions and recipe swaps, was a mess of stunned reactions, sharp defenses, and a few murmurs of sympathy for Mom. Kevin's phone filled with voicemails that weren't begging for money, but asking for explanations. The bank called twice that day to say the internal review had turned up irregularities beyond the mortgage application they'd flagged. Earlier submissions that matched the same pattern, odd notary records, requests to hurry things up, tied to Kevin's accounts. The investigator asked me to sit for a deposition. The police called to confirm the interview that had been scheduled for the week was being moved up. It all felt surreal and procedural at once. Boxes ticking, forms filed, people in sensible coats doing their jobs while my family's private play aired, very publicly, across forms and statements and official channels. Kevin reacted as I expected in the first 48 hours. Anger that sounded like disbelief, followed by defensiveness, and then, when those failed to win friends or sympathy, a flailing attempt at contrition. He called me, wrote pages-long texts, left broken apologies on my voicemail that sounded more like scripts than remorse. "I didn't mean to drag you into it," he said at one point, the voice I had heard for years when he'd promised to set things right. Another time, bitter and near hysterical, he said, "You're ruining our family." He didn't exactly lie. The scaffolding they'd built their lives on was coming down, but the sentence had an odd sense of entitlement behind it, as if their brand of family only worked when everyone else kept making payments in blood and favors. Mom's reaction was a different, quieter thing. At first she denied, then she cried, and then she did something that surprised me. She asked to meet. The first hour across from her, I was all sharp edges and rehearsed lines. The lawyer advised caution. The police had said I should keep communications minimal. But when she came, eyes red, voice small, and said, "I thought I was protecting you in my way." I saw something fragile under the armor. Her defenses weren't ironclad because the thing she'd been leaning on for decades, the story that tied all of us together, had been exposed as an arrangement that used me more than it loved me. She tried to explain choices away with tired phrases. "We were trying to keep the family together. We didn't know it would hurt you this much." And sometimes those words read like excuses. Other times they read like a woman who had learned how to survive in the only way she'd ever been shown. There were consequences that moved beyond feeling. The bank formally rescinded the mortgage approval linked to the forged application and launched a broader inquiry into Kevin's submissions. That alone unraveled the condo situation. Offers were withdrawn, the closing window shut. The notaries who had processed dubious documents were also flagged. Criminal investigators took statements from neighbors who recalled Kevin's braggadocio, from Aunt Lila who had quietly collected her own notes, and from a couple of cousins who admitted later that they'd heard things that made them uneasy but had chalked it up to family drama. Eventually, Kevin was formally charged with forging signatures and attempted fraud. It wasn't immediate. The wheels of the system grind methodically, but it was inexorable. For a man who had always leaned on the idea that charm and connections could solve anything, the law introduced a new variable he hadn't budgeted for. The social consequences were sharper and faster. People who had once greeted him with open arms pulled back. Invitations that had been automatic started coming with hesitations. Some of our relatives spoke privately and then publicly, in the awkward, halting way families do when they're trying to reconcile affection with facts. A few friends of the family, those who'd earlier given him benefit of the doubt, called after the police report to say they were sorry and had been misled. Others, predictably, chose sides. A couple of aunts doubled down on loving Kevin and tried to frame the whole thing as a misunderstanding, while an uncle who'd always admired my practical nature reached out privately to say he believed the facts and that the family needed to reckon honestly. Mia was the most unexpected. She called the week after the wedding, voice small on the phone, the bravado she'd carried since high school replaced with a trembling vulnerability I'd rarely heard. "I didn't know," she said simply. "I didn't ask." It was a short call. She told me she felt stupid for not noticing, for being insulated in a way that made her blind. She said she was ashamed. It wasn't an apology that erased years of taking my help for granted, but it was a crack, and cracks let light in. We didn't fix everything in a single conversation, but she started coming by, sometimes with coffee, sometimes awkwardly offering to help with groceries. She didn't have to earn my trust overnight. I had to see whether she could be consistent. She was. Over months, she transformed into someone quieter, more aware, the entitlement dissipating into something like adult accountability. That change meant more to me than public vindication. I won't pretend I relished the pain my family felt. There's a narrow, ugly pleasure in seeing an abuser startled, but I'd long ago moved beyond wanting to hurt for the sake of hurt. My aim was restitution and, if possible, a recalibration of the balance. The legal route yielded paperwork and, eventually, a court hearing. Kevin pleaded guilty to a reduced charge after negotiation. He avoided the worst penalties because his legal counsel argued for mitigating circumstances and because the local judge, who'd seen destructive family entanglements before, offered a sentence focused on restitution, supervised probation, and mandatory financial counseling. The court ordered him to repay what he could identify as money taken under false pretenses and to perform community service. It wasn't a tidy punishment fit for the years of quiet taking. but it was a tangible acknowledgement that his actions had legal and social costs. Mom agreed to enter family counseling for reasons she framed as wanting to fix things. Whether that was a sincere move toward change or a strategy to salvage relationships was something we navigated in the months that followed. She showed up for a lot of sessions, sometimes defensive, sometimes genuinely reflective. Counseling didn't magically heal years of imbalance, but it did give us tools. Ways to talk about needs without weaponizing guilt. Ways to ask for help that were reciprocal rather than extractive. I learned boundaries that felt new and firm, and she learned that love without expectation of constant sacrifice can still exist. We didn't become a perfect family. We became, slowly, a family learning a different language. On a practical level, I recovered the immediate threat to my credit. The bank's reversal and the police involvement meant the forged application was voided and the credit institutions placed protective notations on my files. The bureaucratic process took weeks, then months, with forms and follow-ups, but it ended with my finances intact and an official record that matched my lived reality. The LLC structure I'd set up and the accounts I'd hardened were untouched and, more importantly, legally separate. A protective wall I'd built from fear and foresight that proved its value. And for me personally, the fallout delivered something I hadn't allowed myself to hope for: ownership. Not in the petty, material sense, but in the quiet, resolute kind. I kept my job and grew into a leadership role I hadn't imagined before the whole thing started. The promotion translated into a small but meaningful move: a modest house with a tiny yard that required no borrowed permission to plant a tree. I signed the papers for that place with my hands steady and no shadow of a forged signature lurking in the file. I planted a sapling in the front yard the first weekend after I moved in, a small act that felt like the opposite of being taken from. It felt like giving myself room to grow. There were losses. Some relatives didn't come around. A few never spoke to me again, choosing instead to preserve their version of the family myth. That hurt in ways I didn't expect. Betrayal cuts new wounds even when you're the one who avoided the blade. Weddings without certain cousins felt emptier for a time. Holiday meals felt odd and tentative for the first few seasons. But those were trade-offs I was willing to make for the clarity I'd gained. Living inside someone else's expectation is exhausting. Living under your own rules is demanding in different ways, but it's honest. One striking consequence was how people outside my family reacted. Friends who'd watched me through the collapse reached out in steady, surprising ways. An old college buddy helped me refinance an emergency fund into a small investment account and taught me the basics of diversification. My boss publicly commended my ability to lead through stress, and the team I ran responded with work and loyalty that felt like a new kind of family. Chosen, dependable, reciprocal. Aunt Lila became, in a quiet sense, family's moral backbone. Her steady presence at the courthouse and the counseling sessions was a reminder that some relationships withstand truth. Months after the court date, Kevin knocked on my door. He looked older, not just from the legal stress, but from a kind of weary humility that had not been there before. "I messed up," he said simply. His apology was halting and not the kind that rewired history. He'd enrolled in financial classes as part of his sentence, taken odd jobs to begin paying restitution, and started seeing a counselor for reasons that felt like they were finally his, not ours. Whether his change would hold was unknown. Whether I'd let him back in fully was another decision I would make slowly and on my terms. I told him what I felt: that trust is not rebuilt in a single conversation, that accountability had a cost, and that I'd accept gradual, consistent proof of change. He accepted that, and we shook hands, a small truce, not a reunion. The last real fallout was quieter, almost domestic. With the legal paperwork filed and the bank's final word sent to my lawyer, I took the binder and archived it. I kept digital copies in a secured folder, of course, but the physical weight of all those pages, years of evidence, voicemails transcribed, receipts, notes, I slipped into a box and placed on a high shelf. It felt symbolic to tuck away the thing that had once been a source of pain into a place where I could see it sometimes and remember not the hurt, but the proof that I had acted, that I had taken myself seriously. In the months and years that followed, the family gatherings smoothed into a different rhythm. When we met, there were quieter conversations, less of the performance and more of the real negotiation of imperfect lives. Mom and I found boundaries that worked. Weekly calls that were no longer bill-focused, occasional dinners that honored each person's needs. Mia slowly became someone I could count on, offering help without expectation. Aunt Lila sat by my side in the stands at my small-town charity 5K, cheering me on like she'd always been there. Most nights, when the house is quiet and the sapling outside my window catches moonlight, I think about how small acts of care become obligations when people forget to say thank you. I think about the voice message and how a single sentence can change the trajectory of a life. I think about revenge, which I once imagined as theatrical and satisfying, and how, in the end, what mattered was accountability, repair, and the stubborn, careful work of building a life that couldn't be taken from me. I didn't set out to ruin anyone. I set out to stop being a resource they treated as infinite. The difference matters. Standing in the yard outside my modest house, hands in my pockets, I realized the loudest thing I could have done had nothing to do with spectacle. It was choosing myself. I watered the sapling that night, and as the leaves caught the moonlight, I finally felt, fully and without apology, like I belonged to no one but me.